Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Aspen Institute. We've got ourselves riled up with that wonderful music and slideshow. I really want to thank our colleagues at the UN Foundation for putting that beautiful slideshow together. They were the supporters of this gorgeous book, which you all have, which is called Why We Care. This is a book of the members of the Global Leaders Council for Reproductive Health. And we're really delighted today to have two extraordinary people to lead us in a really quite timely conversation. And we are delighted that Dr. Fred Tsai is here with us today. He's visiting from Ghana. It's hard to describe Dr. Fred Tsai and to do justice to his biography. He is one of the great believers in the importance of investing in women in the world. He is often called the grandfather of maternal health. He was born in either 22 or 24, I'm not sure. And he's recently celebrated his 90th birthday. He's literally devoted his whole life to the cause of women's health. He has moved mountains for women, both in individual countries, in regions, in the world. He was the chair of two of the major conferences on women in population. He was the chair of the Mexico City conference, as well as the looking for my notes here so I don't get this wrong, the Mexico City conference and the Cairo conference as well, both of those major initiatives. He's really brought dedication, passion to everything he's done, and a patience to a field that's been very little understood. He, in his book, which he has a few copies of here, it's called With Heart and Voice, he talks about when he first left Ghana to go to school in London, and how he was one of the few that left in 1947, one of the few who was able to go and be educated abroad. He went on to train in the University of London, at Edinburgh, and at Harvard. In 1993, he received the United Nations Population Award. In 2006, he received one of his nation's highest honors, which is the Member of the Star of Ghana. He was the chairman of the National Population Council of Ghana from 1992 to 97. He was the president of International Planned Parenthood Federation and was a senior advisor at the World Bank through 1990. He's published and spoke widely. In many ways, he's considered the authority on women's health issues globally. He greeted us today by saying, "What is happening in this country with regards to this issue?" So I'm really delighted to welcome Fred here. And to just tell you a little bit, it's hard to introduce Fred because he's such a moving person that he often makes us cry with his dedication to these issues and how he has spoken for us all. But I just want to say that there's a really wonderful quote in the preface to his book. And it's a favorite hymn. It's a hymn my mother used to sing also, but the words of the hymn are, "Do not wait until some deed of greatness you may do. Do not wait to shed your light afar. To the many duties ever near you now, be true. Brighten the corner where you are." And he said it's a sort of a quaint song, but it has really guided him. And then I'm especially delighted to welcome Jackie Judd as our moderator today. And Jackie, you know, I have to tell you, you are a companion to so many of us. From hearing your voice and being introduced to Jackie Judd as the ABC News correspondent for World News Tonight with Peter Jennings. She was on Nightline. She was on Good Morning America with National Public Radio. You were an anchor for so many years. And so I know your voice so well, and it's been such a comfort to me. Jackie Judd, as many of you know, has received numerous awards for her work in journalism, particularly with regards to women's health. She includes National Emmy Awards, an Edward R. Murrow Award, the Joan Barone Award, the David Bloom Award, a DuPont Award, commendation from Women in Radio and Television for her work on women's health issues, and an Overseas Press Club Citation of Excellence. She's interviewed many people, including John McCain, Tom Daschle. Just last week, I saw a wonderful clip that you did called Health on the Hill that said, okay, now we've reelected Obama. What does that mean? What does that mean for us all? And so, Jackie, you know, we're just delighted to have you here at the Institute, and particularly to enter into conversation with one of our favorite people in the world, who is Dr. Fred Tsai. For those of you, we're delighted to have you with us. We know it's a busy week here in Washington. We'd love for you to relax and enjoy yourselves. After we have our conversation, there'll be Q&A, and we'll also have a book signing. So, Jackie, let me turn it over to you. Thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks so much, Peggy, and thank you for inviting me here to be part of this conversation. I'm honored to share the stage with you, Dr. Tsai.
Thank you, ma'am.
As Peggy's indicated, you've had a most remarkable life, and also, I would say, a kind of improbable life. Who would have guessed it? You grew up relatively poor in Ghana, and you're now an international authority on women's health, maternal health. Was there a moment in your life, in your younger years, when there was that aha moment and you knew what you wanted to do with your life?
You know, I can't say that. It's strange. I seem to be moved by what was in front of me, which I considered necessary at the time. And then I moved into it. Because before I finished my medicine, I wanted to do clinical medicine, to be an internist. But then during the course in physiology and the first degree, I found that malnutrition among children was a major cause of death in our part of the world.
And you saw that in your own life as a child.
And I saw it in my own life as a child.
You grew up, your father died when you were relatively young.
Sure.
You grew up with your mom and your aunties.
Yes.
In what ways did you see those issues you've been working with all your life play out?
Well, you know, if you stay in a women's home in my part of the world, and you grew up till about you were 10 before you left the home, you couldn't but see the suffering that reproductive health brings to women. You saw young cousins and aunties getting pregnant. You saw them going into hospital. All too frequently, some of them didn't come back. Sometimes they came back with a child and they were being comforted. Mm-hmm. And I remember one particularly painful one, which I had to do medicine before I understood what was happening. An aunt of mine had 11 children. One survived. And it turned out that it was a resource incompatibility. At the time, there was no treatment for resource incompatibility. And if there had been any body who could help
What is that? Resource incompatibility?
RH incompatibility.
Okay.
Blood. And a woman's blood and husband's blood were not getting on together. So these things registered. And before I even moved into the parental home, and it kept on registering all the way through my school days and so on, because these were things which you saw in
it was part of your daily life.
It was part of your daily life. The village community, as it were, in those days in which we were living, you could hear the cries going on all the time. So these were with you. They never registered as a child or as a young man. But when you go to do medicine in Britain and you hardly saw anything like that, then you begin to reflect and realize that this was not something which was good.
How did that education overseas in Britain affect your thinking, your views of what was going on back in your home country?
Well, it affected the view to the extent that you saw what progress can mean. You saw what ability to get help easily can mean, both in health and everything else. In fact, you know, I was in my second year when the British Minister of Health came to our college to try and convince us that it was good to have a national health service. This was in 1948. And you should see...
Still a debate being heard now and then today.
you could see this man taken up with it. In Britain had come back from the war, impoverished and so on. And this man was telling us young people, can you imagine that the rich in this country can get health service and the poor people whom we sent to war have come back and there's nothing for them? We must... You know, when you hear that kind of thing, it puts into you a feeling of wanting to do something else when you finish your studies. So
And so you came back full of ideas.
I came back full of ideas.
Did you go back, though, to practice medicine?
Yes, I went back home. In fact, by the time I finished, the laws for getting complete registration had changed. So you could only practice after a full year of being an intern. Mm-hmm. So I had 6 months in Britain, and I had married, so I was very anxious to go home and see my wife and family. Rushed home and went and did the other 6 months in our main hospital, which had been registered for internship by the British. And I stayed, but I kept going backwards and forwards to complete my studies.
And I presume there when you were practicing, you saw the same kinds of issues come up again and again that you saw as a child.
In fact, you saw worse things. As I wrote in the book, before I finished, girls with whom we went to Britain to study, the majority went at the time to study nursing. One of them got pregnant. She committed suicide because the man wouldn't marry her. Another got pregnant. She tried committing suicide, but she was found and she was saved. And we heard this news. And then some started coming. We found out that there were doctors who were prepared to help. At this time in Britain, only women's physical health was permissible as a ground for abortion. And contraceptives were practically unknown, at any rate, not to us young people. So you saw these young people dying. Then I come back and I was doing some autopsies. And there too, I saw several times a young woman was dead. You go and do the post-mortem, and it was an unsafe abortion. The ones who were lucky, they will come and face you with fever of unknown origin. Mm-hmm. And then you will be handling the fever. Then you find out that 3 or 4 weeks before, they had been to a quack and had got something done for them. I mean, all this made one feel that why should young women be made to die from making a mistake which can be handled by quite simple means. Especially by the time I went into practice at home, contraceptives had become available, and various methods for inducing abortions had become available.
How did you make the transition from asking yourself some of the questions you just posed to challenging the government and other authorities with those questions? How did you make the move to political advocacy?
Well, in the beginning, it was not easy because the president we had in the beginning was a socialist government. At the time, the lead was no family planning, no population activities. And in fact, he forbade the importation of contraceptives altogether. So one had to do it clandestinely. I noticed that the children I was looking after, the malnourished children, they also had quite a few of them, about 1/3, the total number, had mothers who were pregnant at the time they were malnourished or had other siblings behind the child who were less than a year or so after the child. So bed spacing probably was one input into saving that situation. So I started with the mothers of the children I was looking after, and we did it quietly in the clinic. Then
so
it's expanded.
You would feed the children in the front of the clinic and teach the moms how to use diaphragms in the back of the clinic,
to
right?
put it that way, yes, to put it that way. But then, fortunately for us, or unfortunately as some of the politicians say, that government was overthrown. And then I noticed there were other doctors, like one called Bano especially, who had been in contact with IPPF in London. And they decided that we should form a National Family Planning Association. So we formed the association, and from the association we started convincing the then government that getting a family planning program in policy would be a right thing. So the policy was issued, and in 1970, Ghana was about the second country in Africa to come out with a policy. In fact, it was the first to come out with a really comprehensive population policy. And I was a consultant to the group that wrote the policy.
Remarkably groundbreaking.
Yes, it was. Unfortunately, the government launched the program, the US aid gave us some money, and the government didn't put any money behind it, nor did it put any political voice behind it. And this lack of governmental funding and political leadership has plagued the program until today.
And even today, when Ghana has an emerging middle class, it is a democracy. It still has one of the higher maternal mortality rates in the world. Aside from what you've just talked about, the political will, the funding that's necessary, what are the other barriers that exist not only there, but elsewhere in West Africa?
First of all, the poverty, the general poverty of Africa is one of the major barriers. Second, which is attached to the poverty, could be the lack of education, general education. Third is attached to the education level, the role of traditional cultures, and I will add religion into this. The charismatic religion which has taken over parts of Africa right now does not give much space for thinking about women's health and women's needs, and family planning is being swallowed up. Because
does it inhibit it?
Well, they don't fight it aggressively, but when you have a Bible which they quote to you and said, God said to man, be fruitful and multiply. Mm-hmm. And you say, well, if I were translating it, I would put a comma after fruitful. Be fruitful first. The fruit must develop and have its sweetness, and the seed develop before it multiplies properly. But they won't accept it. It's be fruitful and multiply. And so, and these are the kinds of things we have to fight.
You wrote in your book a wonderfully kind of simple question. So the main thing is when talking about barriers, the main thing is to educate the person, let the person look at their own circumstances. But how do you ask them to stop having children when perhaps that is their only hope?
Well, this is one of our problems too, because infant mortality rates have been quite high, and they are being brought down radically. But the spacing of the child, the planning of the size of the family itself is an input into reducing infant mortality. And this is something which we want our leadership to understand. So in supporting family planning, they are supporting both inputs into saving a woman's life, but into survival of children too. And this is something over which, unfortunately, with the kinds of health services that we are developing, the health services, that's another of our problems, because the health services are being overtaken by today's Western European health services. Have a very grand laboratory, have a CT scan, have those kinds of things. And when those take the money, there's practically none left for the primary health care. Mm-hmm. That is the health care that is needed. And when you find children dying in large numbers, then the thing becomes a lottery. You want to put in more children so some will survive. It is no longer the case. I think we are doing better with our children's survival.
What is the average number of children that a woman has in Ghana now?
It has come down to 4 point something.
Uh-huh.
It started at 8, it came to 6, it's now at 4 point something. One of the things which surprises many of us is Ghana has got a contraceptive prevalence rate of only 23 or so. And yet it has got this fairly decent total fertility rate. And most of us feel that it's because the clandestine abortion services have taken root, and maybe they are getting even safer. In the last couple of years, I learned that misoprostol has become quite widely available in the country. And since the medical ethics is, if a person comes and they are bleeding, your first responsibility is to stop the bleeding and save them. They find that way of getting behind the law better than anything else.
The Family Planning Conference was held in London this past summer, and at its conclusion, NGOs, organizations, countries made a series of commitments. And a leader of the Ministry of Health from Ghana went on camera to talk about one of the commitments being moving forward free family planning services in the public sector. Has it happened? Will it happen? If so, what difference would it make?
I think it will happen. It hasn't happened in that it is not being executed. It has partly happened in that the Parliament has passed it as a law. I don't know whether it's one of the binding resolutions or a recommendation to government. But certainly the last time I talked with the head of the service, which will be doing this, she said they were still consulting to find out how to pay for it and how to manage it. So it has not happened as a fact. And that is one thing which we are fighting for. You know, DFID, the British, gave us money for starting maternal health services. How many years ago? About 5 years ago now. And we started implementing the maternal health services. And family planning was not made part of the totality of maternal health services.
Why?
Can you imagine?
Why?
I'm asking why. I think it is also a fringe echo from here, because if family planning can become a problem for the United States, if the government can say, like they said in Mexico, they will stop funding non-governmental family planning organizations, whatever reason they gave, and keep on fighting about funding the IPPF and other international organizations.
Well, in your view, what can the international community, and I'm talking about all sectors, what can the international community do to support getting more access where it's needed, more care where it's needed?
Actually, I think the international community made pledges, and so the financial is beginning to come in. I hope it will expand and come in. But you see, if you are giving us money, and yet the news coming from here is that we don't believe that you should be planning your families, it makes it quite difficult. So I believe that some of the talk has to come from here. And fortunately, I don't want to be involved in American politics, but I think fortunately for the family planning programs, you have wisely re-elected the man who was saying that.
Well, now that you brought it up, we did have a campaign recently, and I'm wondering, as a visitor, a resident at one point of Washington, D.C., what your thoughts were about the campaign as it went on, not only the presidential campaign, because it was more at the senatorial, congressional levels where women's issues, I'll call it, were brought up.
Well, you know,
in some surprising ways.
The unfortunate thing is that in this country, you've now got a permanent campaign going on. The day a president gets elected, you start campaigning for his removal or his stay. But that aside, I think if there is providence, one can say providence has been good or kind to people like me, in that some of your competitors asking for election to the place, made such awful statements that the public got awakened, that women especially, and the poor, got frightened enough to want to vote against the people making those statements. I mean, when somebody says that a woman who advocates family planning is a slut, it's just as ignorant as my people who were saying if you give your wife family planning, she will become promiscuous. You know, I mean, I don't see the difference. And yet, this is a highly educated as opposed to an illiterate.
Well, with President Obama in office for another
Sure.
4 years, I presume the gag rule, which is what you were alluding to earlier, will remain as it is lifted.
Sure.
How hard has it been for countries to go back and forth?
Well,
sometimes it's in place, and then other times it's not.
I can use my own country to tell you. One of the best programs of our Family Planning Association, the non-governmental one, was part of the IPPF system, which I was president of, was youth programs where they opened places just for them to come and have games, indoor games, sit down and read libraries, and then a clinic at the side for those who had a problem. Mm-hmm. So nobody knew what was going on in the clinic or when you're coming in and going out of the clinic. The majority of these had to be shut down. Mm-hmm. When the IPPF funding from USAID was stopped. You know, fortunately, it has gotten running now again, and it's running very well. Had we lost, the president lost, the chances are that we'll go back to thinking of which ones we to shut down again. Mm-hmm. The amount of contraceptive supplies that were going into the system came down. And there is so much research showing that when contraceptives become unavailable or difficult to obtain, unsafe abortions go up. I mean, there's no major scientific examination to do about that. It was proven in Chile, it was proven in Romania, it has been proven in many, many parts of the world. And that is what happens when you are even trying to get people onto contraceptives, and then the contraceptives are not there. Mm-hmm. What do?
Changing topics slightly, the signature program of President Obama in the first administration in terms of global health was, of course, the Global Health Initiative. And it was an approach that was a more holistic approach
Sure.
to global health issues as opposed to kind of siloed diseases.
Yeah.
What impact has that had in the issues you worry about?
Well, quite frankly, any health program, any holistic approach to health program, it makes me feel good because the issues that I worry about will be taken care of. But as I said already, the people out there in the field, when they get money for health, the first things they think of are the major cities and the need for clinical health services. And that is why sometimes it is necessary when you are thinking of health programs to identify programs which are behind or programs which have got a priority which has not been recognized, mm-hmm. like maternal mortality was. I was told by a man in Bangladesh that you are talking about my wife. If my wife dies, I get another one. Mm-hmm. And that was the feeling. So you need to have a program which will take care of some of the specialized needs whilst you are thinking of the broad program for the service generally. I've been the director of health services in my country before.
Yeah.
And it was tough.
Do you find that after the many decades you've been fighting this fight, that you still need to convince people that there is a connection between maternal health and food security and housing and education, is it still an argument that you need to respond to?
I think it is still an argument we need to respond to in our country. And you see, when you have here in this country people not believing that special education towards looking after family program and so on was necessary, that general development will do it. Then when in our part of the world you are trying to make them understand that general development requires to be helped by these other programs, it is a difficult thing. And number two, this is not a field in which people get glorified. I mean, if you are a clinician, if you are a heart specialist, you get glorified. You get some good input. If you are advocating family planning, if you are advocating maternal health, you know, even in the maternal health field, the people who are gynecologists, they make easier lives than the ones who are obstetricians, who look after the delivery service. Look at this country. Look at the obstetricians. The obstetricians are living in the field. Mm-hmm. But gynecologists who are doing the small surgeries for women are still in the field.
So you still feel like you're in the trenches?
I still feel I'm in the trenches. And the reason why I still feel I'm in the trenches is that, like we say in the Aspen group, the leadership has not accepted it. It has not become politically mature thing to talk about these things.
Well, Peggy mentioned that through your life you've participated in many high-level, I'll make this a long question so you could take a good bit of water there, that you participated in many international conferences on this issue. You led some of those conferences. Tell us about some of those experiences, and do those conferences get at the issue you were talking about? Does it raise the profile? Does it help resolve issues? Does it move the needle?
You know, one conference which I chaired, which is not mentioned often, which really got me the high level of the international stage, was infant and young child feeding. Mm-hmm. This was when they did the Nestle boycott. You remember?
Absolutely.
There was a wild international debate and even fights on this ground. And the WHO and UNICEF put together a conference and asked me to chair it. And that was my major baptism into resolving international disputes in this field. Mm-hmm. When the conference makes the resolutions, sorry,
you want a little bit more?
It gives it helps to give some of our leadership, not only the political but even program leaders, a lot of confidence, a lot of courage to move forward. But when the fringe echo comes back from Europe and North America against some of the things, if I go back to this infant and young child feeding, when we said advertising for these products should not be general, mm-hmm. and then suddenly you find on your televisions and so on, they don't care. The same industrial groups are working in my part of the world. So why should they care? And it is this idea that let the world as a whole, when they agree on something, see it moving. It's like pie in the sky. But we have to start thinking that way. And whilst the thinking is not coming, people like me have to keep on telling our people, don't mind those people. They are in a different world. They have got things we haven't got. So please, or they choose to forget the problems of their hard done by groups, which we cannot do because our hard done by groups are the majority.
You speak for a moment or two about the Cairo conference. Because from what I read in your book, it sounds like some of the kind of culture wars. There were some culture wars going on in there. What was the legacy of the Cairo conference?
I think the Cairo conference did a very good thing in that it decided that women and girls have been left behind for too long. Their inputs into economics, inputs into culture, inputs into upbringing of the human race has been ignored. And ignoring that, we have also therefore ignored their needs for education, their needs for the services, and so on. And that we had in the past been seeing them, even the population people were seeing them merely as objects. Those who wanted population control saw them as objects through which they could do population control. Whereas if you saw the person as a subject with a life, with a contribution to make, the way you think about them and their needs completely different. And this, to me, is the major outcome of Cairo.
One of the themes running through many of your comments this past 45 minutes or so has been the necessity for political will and for leadership.
Sure.
You are now an elder statesman. How do you bring up a younger generation of people who will take the torch?
Well, that's where the youth activities like the one I mentioned in Ghana come off. In February or March next year, Ford Foundation has given me a sum of money to run a workshop for young people who will follow. And the actual thing that we want to do is to let the young people take a look at the ICPD program of action, and we will fire them to become advocates. We will want to teach them how to understand what the program says, learn the wider implications, and advocate within their communities. And hopefully, they will also get other young people around. They'll move into the youth. In fact, apart from this, Peggy mentioned that I was with Women Deliver. Women Deliver has got quite a youth program which comes on. And just in Uganda, just last March, we had a major session with the youth. We hope that through those things, we will be able to get the young people to be fired up. And then they are getting more and more educated. And I think they will become a good enough threat to the political leadership or the religious leadership for them to take notice.
And how does Aspen's own Global Leaders Council, which you're a part of, where do they fit into what you've just been talking about?
Well, they have got a link with the international leadership, and we are bringing our local knowledge and local needs, and through that help, we can put these in front of the international leadership. You know, one of the things which probably doesn't happen too much is one leader talking to another and saying, this is what I'm doing. Aspen brought us to London the other few months ago, and I had heard of the work that the Minister of Health was doing in Ethiopia, for example. The funny thing was, Ethiopia came to Ghana to find out what our research studies were showing us about extending health services to the rest of the community. They went back and did it.
They ran with it.
and we are still fighting to get it done. So, so that kind of interchange between the leadership is what Aspen helps to bring about.
I have a final question before I open it up to our audience, and that is, it's clear you have been an inspiration to many people over many years in many different parts of the world. I'm wondering who your inspiration was.
I think inspiration has to be fired up as you go along. So you can start with somebody as an inspiration, get another one somewhere. But I think in this field that my first inspiration was from Alan Guttmacher. I was in my clinic doing nutrition when he was introduced to me in Ghana. And this huge man sat there and talked to me about what was happening to families and so on around the world, and said, I'm going to run a conference in Nairobi. I'd like you to come by the end of the meeting. And I went, and I have been fired up. I mean, if this man, an American gynecological obstetrician, if he, with all his comforts, can just get up and decide that this was a need for the rest of the world, and he will come to Africa, given all of the problems, and continue to even come and run a conference in Africa so we can see the light. Who am I not to follow him?
I guess we have to be grateful that meeting took place.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have two ladies in the audience with microphones. When you get one, if you could just identify yourself, the organization you're with, and then ask a question. Who'd like to go first? Yes. Always hard to get the first one.
I wasn't planning to be first, but I wasn't going to let the moment go by without somebody ready to ask a question. Earlier this afternoon, I was at the UNFPA launch of the World Population Report for 2012. And the title of the report is By Choice, Not by Chance.
That's right.
And when I was the USAID population officer in Ghana 34 years ago, which is when I first got to know Fred Tsai, the motto of the Ghana National Family Planning Program was children by choice,
Sure.
not by chance.
Sure.
I'm a history buff. I'm wondering whether you happen to know how that came to be Ghana's motto?
Well, it was our motto because that was our belief. We thought leaving fertility unplanned means, like I said earlier on, that it was a lottery situation. I think lottery and chance are quite close words. And therefore, when we said they should plan, we came to say, let it be by choice and not by chance. That was all. I don't think there was any deeper thinking to it than that. But that was the objective. That was what we were trying to do.
Yes. Peggy.
Sorry. In your book...
Wait for the mic, Peggy.
Oh, sorry.
You should know that.
In your concluding thoughts, you start by saying, recently I told an audience that I find it difficult to hold my head up high when I review the field of nutrition, reproductive health, and family planning in Africa. What would you say to those of us who are involved in discussions about development for Africa right now? And you've seen so much. Why aren't we able to move the needle more? And what would your advice be? You're here in Washington. You have to tell us.
I thought I have said it in so many different ways. First of all, we just have to keep working at it. We have to, those who are able to get the funders, money givers, to give the money, please keep asking them for the money. But number two, please help us to get our leadership to appreciate that this is really a promotive health input. Family planning really does help to promote health. The health of women first, the health of children, and the health of girls. And then that it really helps families. You know, somebody was asking about why do you want to put this also into the environment thing? The environment situation, the people who are having lots of children and living in poverty, although they are not contributing a lot to environment, are really suffering from these situations very much more. They have no resilience. They have no capacity for adaptation. I mean, can you imagine a family of 10 living in one hut in a storm? So we ask to help. Let the basic things that are needed be available. But we also ask that our leadership be helped to understand that girls and women's education is the foundation of our national development. And if we leave that, we won't get on. This to me is a major obsession, because I'm seized with it. I see it.
Before the event started, you were talking about the upcoming presidential election.
Yes.
In Ghana.
Yes.
Is this being talked about? Is this an issue? Is one party more identified with it than another?
Well, I think both parties are identified with maternal health. Both parties are seized with creating the services that are needed for handling obstetric emergencies and so on. But it is my party that I have managed to get seized with the question of family planning. And they have actually put it in their manifesto that they will reposition the family planning program and see that it is more expansive.
Is there another question? Yes, Lisa, up here.
Thanks very much, Dr. Sai, for such a wonderful presentation. I actually have a follow-up question to what you were just saying about education being foundational to global health. And I'm sorry, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Lisa Carty from UNAIDS. But my question is, we hear, and I think so many people believe in principle and want to make that the reality, that education and health are better integrated. But many donors, our funding is still, the education money is here and the health money is there. And I'm wondering if in your experience, have you seen countries that are doing a good job of this, where ministries of health and ministries of education are really working together? And have you seen models that we should be learning from and being more supportive of? Thanks.
Sorry, I can't say that I have seen any in my part of Africa. But so now that you brought the question up, the little time that I have still to travel, I will look and see whether there is any. In my country, it just doesn't exist.
Yes. Yep.
I'm Ed Berry with the Sustainable World Initiative. The last time I was in London, I met with Jill Greer and her policy manager, and they mentioned to me that they haven't used the term overpopulation in many years, but they're thinking of using it now. The advantage, of course, of using it is to convey a sense of urgency for more investments, but of course the disadvantage is that people think maybe you're talking about population control. So I'm wondering what your opinion is on using that phrase now. Thank you.
I think we made the word taboo because of the way it was used to guide programs. So instead of programs having a human face, they took a macro population face, and you had the Indian programs. In fact, to an extent, you are having some of that problem with the one-child family programs of China. They are now being actively against people who force women to have an abortion at a late stage. The extent to which they are succeeding, I don't know. But it is that sensitivity that led to the anti-population terminology within our programs. And as I mentioned earlier, when you look at overpopulation as the objective of a program, then you begin to do a mathematical exercise. And when you do a mathematical exercise, then you begin to see which of the family planning methods will give you the mathematical result that you want. And that method, without relating to the individuals on whom you are going to use that method, creates the kind of backlash that the word overpopulation produces. And therefore, I personally find it difficult. I don't want to use the word overpopulation anymore, because there's the argument, overpopulation in relation to what? And then you begin.
What phrase do you favor? What phrase do you favor? What would you use?
Oh, I mean, I won't use anything, any phrase that way. I say have the people understand that they need fewer children than they have now. Right. I mean, I was telling my leader of my party, I said, look, you talk about education for all, and that is talking about something which I agree with. But you don't talk about the demand side of that equation. You want to educate every child, and yet the people who are producing the children, you don't think you should talk to them about, please, if you produce less children or less frequently, we will be able to educate them better for you. You don't have to say the population of children is too big. It doesn't matter to Mrs. X in the village.
And what did he say to you?
Oh, he accepted that. These were the arguments we used to get them to accept the family planning thing in the program. Yeah. So it is what it connotes in program terms that some people are against. Yes, sir. No, he wanted a follow-on. Oh.
Good evening, Prof.
Good evening.
My name is Mike Egbo
Hey,
from Nigeria.
Egbo, what are you doing here?
Good evening, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I think coming from Nigeria, I want to ask a question about politics as a game of numbers.
Yeah.
Where people are talking about, increasing their population because they want people to vote for them.
Sure.
And when Bill Clinton was in Nigeria about 2 years ago, he was talking about HIV/AIDS. In that audience, there were 2 ex-presidents. And I asked him, I said, you were a president of the United States. Now you're fighting HIV in Africa. I say, in the audience, we have ex-presidents. What are you doing as a former president to convince your other former presidents who are probably richer than yourself to do what you're doing?
Yeah.
In that background, I'm saying, what are you, Prof, doing to ensure that our leaders recognize the issue of reproductive health, the issue about women and children? I always say, for people to know, I'm in this field because I lost my mother in the labor room. At a time when she should not be pregnant, at a time when she should have been resting, at a time when she had no bargaining power with my dad. She died. My dad married 2 other women. So I think the issue is still there today. And I'm saying, what are we doing and what are you doing to ensure that our leaders are taking the appropriate action? The second question is beyond conferences. There are so many conferences. We're ready to put money into conferences. We have big titles, big themes. What happens beyond these conferences? Most of these conferences, as far as I'm concerned, they produce results. People come, they stay in hotel, we talk, we chat, good PowerPoint presentation, but the next year, nobody reviews the previous conference. What are we going to do to ensure that these conferences are meaningful? Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Let me say one of the things that I have been doing, of which I'm proud, is you.
Part of that younger generation we were talking about.
Identifying
right?
your potential and getting you further training so that you can ask me questions. Second thing that I want to say is sorry about your mother. She must have been such a really necessary and powerful woman. After her, your father had to marry 2 women. So now, so the first question that you asked, I agree with you. Our presidents, past presidents and politicians, they seem to be interested in just politics and making money. You know, one of your past presidents, when I was in the World Bank, was open to what we are talking about. I'm talking about Obasanjo. He had a farm, he had a conference center there. The World Bank went there to hold a conference with African leaders, and we went to talk with them. So why can't they continue? So these are questions which we Africans need to find time to sit down and discuss and ask our leaders. I don't know, perhaps this is something the Aspen Institute can put down and see whether we can get a meeting of a few of the African presidents now and then, so they can be encouraged to speak that these things are not against God, they are not against the Bible, and that these are important things. Yes, we have to do that.
And the value of the conferences.
The value of the conferences. I have mentioned, of course, everybody is very fond of that baby. So I mentioned my conference, which I was most fond of as the Infant and Young Child Feeding Conference. It led to the creating of the International Consensus on the Marketing of Breast Milk Substitutes. That was a major, major achievement. And countries even passed laws against just handling these milk substitutes in hospitals, giving it to women without training them, and so on. So every country has a responsibility after a conference to decide on how they are going to handle the findings from the conference. If we leave the international organizers of the conference to be the ones who are going to deal with how the conference findings are going to impact our countries, we are not being fair to them. That is not our job. Our job is identifying the problem, bringing together people who can think of the solutions,
and share those ideas. I've seen it at the International AIDS conferences I've covered since 2002.
That's right.
And, you know, it's an opportunity for someone from Ghana to talk to somebody
Sure.
from Mongolia
Sure.
about
Sure.
different things happening in their countries. Would never happen otherwise.
No. And I, as I said earlier on, these conferences sometimes give our leadership courage to talk about difficult issues. And so we have to manage the conferences. I have been asked whether we should have a 20-year anniversary conference of the ICPD, a conference like we had. I said no. And I said no because another conference is going to reopen old wounds, and we are going to hash over all of the issues that we had with the Pope and his cohorts. Mm-hmm. Pardon me, I'm not anti-Catholic, but they didn't behave too well in this conference. And for the Pope and about 6 countries to hold off debate on a conference for, say, 6 days because of the word individual.
This was in Cairo.
No, this one was in Bucharest.
Oh.
When we managed to get the phrase, family planning is the right of couples and individuals.
Oh, okay. Is there another question? Yes, up here.
Yes, hello. I'm Marta Espelta from La Caixa Foundation, Spain. And related to this that you were just mentioning, I'm looking at the pictures there, and I do miss seeing more pictures of men. You know, if you see the proportion, I think it's 12 and 3 or something like that. And I just wonder, because reproductive health, obviously, it's a woman's issue, it's important to the woman, but the role of men is key, it's really important. And how do we approach that, and where do we find more men like you and the ones here who care for reproductive health and in the same way? Thank you.
Good question. Thank you.
Very good question. When I chaired Cairo in 1994, and then the Women's Conference in Beijing was to be in 1995, and the organizers of the conference came to Accra to hold a media event to popularize the thing. And they thought I should be invited to it because of my experience with the ICPD and so on. And you know who said no? My president's wife at the time. So number one, let's convince the women that this is not simply women who will carry it forward. And let's ask them to try and find out and pester men and develop some men. There are some men probably who are simply waiting to be invited because they think it is just a women's issue. And we think that is something. When I keep on talking about meeting the leadership of Africa, for example, there are only 2 women leaders in Africa. So I'm including men and thinking that we should. But I think this is a question for Aspen Institute to examine.
One more question. Yes, right up here.
Okay, before the mic comes to me, my name is Murtada Mai. I'm also from Nigeria, but I currently work for Pathfinder International on the E2A project. Just listening to all the issues we're talking about and then looking at the demographics happening, what do you see as some of the issues related to young people, and are we doing enough to address the needs of young people, and what could we do more to address the needs of young people?
The issues relating to young people, number one, in Africa, education. Up through secondary and past secondary. Because I am really, really shocked when I see people who have been through 6 or 8 years of our primary schools and their inability to handle themselves. The education doesn't seem to have made a difference. When you do the research, you don't find any difference. So past primary school education is a key for all the young people. Number 2 is to make sure that we make them understand that technical training, technical education is also education. And it is a major thing. And you know, when I hear of countries like mine, which have got polytechnic institutes, and then they say they are going to turn them into universities, I say, what crazy idea. You have engineers, you don't have engineering technicians to support your engineers. And instead of expanding your technical institute, making it strong, and then building your engineering school, you want to build engineering school. So that's another area. So education to me is key, and training for technical skills. Then identification of needs, particular needs that they have. If it is support to start an entrepreneurial activity, do so. And let's start thinking of how our young people in Africa can be supported to do these things. People talk about empowering young people. When you see the number of young women who are running on the streets of Lagos and the streets of Accra or the beaches, who say they are selling things and so on, and you feel frightened for the future. Because all of these are going to produce children, and these children are going to be produced in these circumstances. and what do we do about it? So, to me, youth and what we want to do with them right now is a major concern for all Africa. And they're putting it as a program priority, we need to support our governments to seek the proper people who will help those who are already past it, but to see to it that they don't neglect education, good quality education for those who are coming along.
Thank you so much. It's been an honor and a pleasure. I appreciate it. Peggy's going to close things out for us.
Thank you.
Let me just take a moment to give a round of applause to Fred, really for your lifetime of work and for inspiring us and challenging us, we'll try to make you proud. We'll try to follow your lead and really continue to be as brave as you've been. And Jackie, I really want to thank you. You know, you're such a magnificent journalist. We all have listened to so much you've done, and you truly care about the issues. And we're really delighted to have you here in the Aspen community. So I really want to thank you both. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our audience. It's been a fascinating session. This has been live streamed. It's also going to be available for many others who wanted to see it or weren't able to join us today. I want to just take a moment to say one of the projects of the Global Leaders Council, those lovely faces up there, of which Fred is our leader, is we began last year in May at the World Health Assembly to present an award called the Resolve Award to countries that were really moving the needle on access to family planning and reproductive health services. It's a highly competitive, non-monetary award. Anyone can nominate a country for it. We would love it if all of you would join in thinking about countries or organizations that have been doing exceptional work in moving the needle on family planning. We really need to continue to push for this. We are lagging way behind many, many other health indicators. So you'll find flyers about the Resolve Award tucked into your book that's on your chair. You can also submit nominations at www.resolveaward.org. The 2013 award will be presented at the World Health Assembly in Geneva. It's quite a wonderful event. Last year, the awards were given to Ethiopia, Malawi, Nepal, Rwanda, and Yemen had a special mention. So I'd like to invite all of you to join us in recognizing those that are doing work on this area. I'd also like to say please join us in the lobby for refreshments. Fred has agreed to sign some of his books, which we'll be doing, and I also